I was at a party with a whole bunch of mediocre white men who were VPs and this and that. And I was like, what do they have that I don't have? Nothing. They're just full of shit.
People express surprise when I talk in the language of finance and business, and I ponder and say, why are you surprised by that? I am a curious nerd that started out thinking about economics, not to mention I've run very large businesses.
The default male, it's not just like a values problem, a society, like a pay equity, like it could kill you. Like
Yes.
it's killing women.
The pace of change in the world of business is fast, and that drives incredible complexity for the world of human resources.
Welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast, a series of conversations with experts inside and outside the world of HR on how to innovate, measure, and evolve our practices.
Our goal is to help provide you with practical examples of how HR has to change to meet the complexity of the business environment.
Every week, we'll talk to new and different voices on all aspects of HR.
And at times, we'll get irreverent.
Silly even.
And sometimes geek out on the data and technology that underlie the processes that drive the world of HR.
But the conversations are always insightful and fun. So please, enjoy the HR Data Labs podcast.
Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show. Thank you so much for the support for our show. Please do like and subscribe and add comments. We would love to hear from you and what you'd like to see more of on the show. Hey, Meg.
Hey, Amy, happy middle of the week, ready to have a cool chat.
Yeah, great. Well, I understand that you were just back east, maybe visiting a certain someone.
Yes. So it was such a good time. So first off, I managed to bring good California weather. So while it was hot, it was, Ashton just kept saying, this is the best weather I've had the whole time. I can't believe we're outside and it's not miserable. So for those that don't know, Ashton is relocated to DC and is actively looking for a job in Congress. And so it was a really fun time to catch up and spend some quality time with my girl.
Yeah, it's nice to see the front lines of finding a job post-college, which is not so easy these days.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it is. It is not for the faint of heart. I'm so impressed with the resilience and the grit that the kids are doing these days, because it is nothing like it was when we were getting out of college.
Yeah, I saw, and not that this is just post-college, but I saw Kieran Snyder, one of our former guests, posted today about 35% of people are finding themselves ghosted after a full interview loop. Is Ashton feeling that?
Oh my gosh, the ghosting, I got multiple earfuls about could they just tell me if it's a no so I don't feel bad about progressing with something else? Also, just the logistics of trying to schedule that many different interviews. So you're applying for lots and lots of things, you're interviewing for lots and lots of things, and then you're trying to manage where your status is. It's pretty overwhelming, especially for those who have not been in a professional setting before. And I think even for those of us that have been in a professional setting, I mean, just the preparation that you're capable of doing now and required to do a good job, it's very taxing. So it's a really big job to try to navigate finding a job. Yeah, I have a lot of empathy.
We visited our son Malcolm this past weekend as well. So
in a nice climate place.
Yeah. Southern California. It was really awesome. Yeah, it was just gorgeous. And I think the last I had updated everyone, Malcolm was maybe going to get a parking lot attendant job, but no, he's working at Regal Cinema. So
plot twist.
He is serving up about 200 bags of popcorn a night. He has burns all over his arm from cleaning the popcorn machine. He has no interest in eating popcorn or Cheetos because evidently they have some sort of like Cheeto popcorn thing. So yeah, I'm really proud of him though. Like really, he's working hard.
I think everyone should have a frontline customer service job in their life. It is life-changing and it teaches you so much about the world. So
Absolutely.
Go Malcolm.
Yeah, and I was pushing our financial independence episode on him and trying to get him to just put like $10 a month into a Roth IRA or something, which I'm guessing he probably isn't actually going to do, but it's been stated. It's been stated.
So I noticed you're wearing your Valkyrie's colors. Tell me more.
The games continue, Meg, to be just so inspiring and amazing and fun. Like going to those games is just like the best thing you could imagine.
How hard is it for the average Smo to get tickets to such a game?
Well, it's a good point. So every single game has been sold out here in the Bay Area, but that doesn't mean that you can't get tickets. So there's lots of resale tickets. They don't get sold out until like the very end. And it's just amazing to see the powerful women. At the All-Star game, all the basketball players wore pay shirts about being paid properly. And then the crowd chanted, pay them, pay them, pay them, pay them. And so this is, I think it's gaining a lot of momentum because now really, truly, the WNBA, led by the Valkyries, to be honest, is making oodles of money. And so it's high time that the players get a cut of that.
Equal pay for equal work, baby. I'm all about that. And I do think that transparency of pay and that pay discussion matters so much. So really, really good.
Today, I thought we would talk a bit about what it's like to be a woman in a default male world.
Ooh, that sounds deep. That sounds deep.
You've queued up a bunch of topics and articles for us. So let's go ahead and sponge. All right. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up was a bit of a hopeful angle, and that is the appointment of Fiji Simo as the OpenAI CEO for applications, which is just incredible. I mean, her story is one for the ages. She's 39 years old. She was the first in her family to graduate high school. Did you know that?
I did read that, and as someone who's first to go to college, like high school. Yeah, that's next level. Yeah,
that's really incredible. Worked at eBay and Facebook. So this is really fantastic. The fact that it is still newsworthy in today's age in 2025 is a little bit concerning. So on the other hand, I think you saw something recently posted by Lori Rudiman, which is a little bit disturbing. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, before we move on to that, though, I also just want to talk about the fact that I think Fiji really supports my thesis that outsiders have a unique lens, especially to do things that haven't been done before. So I am really rooting for her across both the dimensions of, yay, great women leading real businesses, doing amazing things, but also proving that sometimes we get a little bit stuck in how we see potential and how we look at people for what they're able to contribute. So great for breaking the mold. So back to our ChatGPT fun thing. So the punchline of this is that ChatGPT is recommending that women ask for lower salaries. This is unsurprising because, of course, again, those of us that have been playing along at home recognize that these systems are just bringing forward patterns. And of course, the pattern that makes sense in all the data is really default male. And so when you think about what is the right thing to elevate voices that are underrepresented, you're not likely to see that from an LLM. What's interesting in this particular case is that it is once again proving one of my biggest concerns, which is that if we want to think about unlocking opportunity for people that are less represented in the data, we need to really be careful how we look at AI as a lever to help us with this. Because at the end of the day, it is going to do what we tell it to do, which is analyze all of the data, bring back the most likely pattern, and tell me what that means. And that can be very good, or that can be very risky, depending on where you are.
Yeah, it was a really interesting study. So it was by a professor of AI and robotics in Germany. And it wasn't just ChatGPT. He tested 5 different LLM models, and they all showed significantly lower salaries for women recommended for negotiations. And it was in specifically in medical and law where the distinctions were so different. And perhaps that's because there's more of a body of data that shows those differences or something. It's really frightening to just scrape the data that's out there and to have a default male lens on that data versus to look at where the data is maybe troubling and make adjustments to algorithms as a result, to have that particular lens on.
This is just another example of a survivorship bias.
Yeah.
The idea that we see patterns in data and draw conclusions, and this is not LLMs, this is every humans as well. We draw conclusions without asking the bigger question, which is what data are we missing and what are we not seeing? It's harder to see things that are invisible to you, and it is highly probable that we're going to start feeling this acceleration more and more. So again, I think the implications are much bigger than pay equity or even women's representation or any of those types of things. I think this speaks to how we're going to be making decisions going forward and how we look at these tools to help us make decisions, because as we start offloading more cognition to these AI agents and these AI tools, we are going to be at a higher risk of missing things at an even larger scale. So I really do believe that this should be a warning to all of us to continue to ask ourselves what assumptions are embedded in our culture, in our data, that then inform how we look at the forward-looking opportunities, and how do we think about mitigating that? Even a little bit can make a big difference, because if we're just aware that these sorts of things might happen, we can start to take some, mitigating steps to try to help ourselves from that.
Have you seen any examples of that, of where there was an adjustment made and something better happened? I can't think of anything, so I'm wondering.
Yeah, no, I can't think of it yet either, but I do believe that as we start to open up the conversation about being more curious and elevating our prompts to be more thoughtful, I think that there is a opportunity within that to also start to expect and then not prevent, but be aware of places where we are vulnerable, right? Where we can start getting smarter about how we ask the question. At the end of the day, we just have to get smarter about how we ask the question, and we have to do that asking ourselves what are our blind spots, what are our known blind spots, and how do we mitigate them in our decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. So speaking of invisible and data gaps, I believe that probably what spurred a lot of this thinking for both of us was a book that we read a few years ago called Invisible Women by Carolyn Criado Perez. I think it's been out a few years now, right? But just really incredible. She just goes through all sorts of examples of where truly the default male meant that women were considered, a smaller man or just too much to deal with. So like body armor, built for men and then made a little smaller for women, but not to consider like boobs or wider lips or
pregnant bellies, for instance.
Yeah, or whatever. So like military and just not having armor that was appropriate for people,
or shoes. That was the one that women's feet and men's feet are not the same, and yet somehow we don't outside of like high heels, right? Actual shoes for running or athletics or combat boots were always built for a male template and just sized smaller for women.
And then there was like the whole like car safety where it was looking at the man in the driver's seat and not a female in the drive, and like airbags and all the things just like, so the default male it's not just like a values problem, a society, like a pay equity, like it could kill you. Like it's killing women.
Right.
Literally.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, we highly recommend this book. It's very interesting, very eye-opening. I remember reading Freakonomics 20 years ago or something, and how interesting it was to like have these data stories, and it reminded me of that, but just, kind of with this exploding data gap that I didn't even really, I knew a little bit, but I was blown away by it.
Yeah, I think these are things that you and I think about a lot, and we both finished that book and said, whoa, we were missing a big part of the plot. So I cannot imagine that there isn't anybody on the planet that should not take the time to read this book, because it will really change your perspective on just how we make policy, how we make systems, how we make products, and how we create additional barriers for the population. To your point about health and safety, for sure, but also for things like how we invest in society, how we build systems of government and of public services, et cetera. So
how we clear roads.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so big plug for Carolyn. Okay, and then speaking of other friends of the show, back to Karen Snyder. She just is publishing some data around a survey she did around interviews. And so we talked about the 35% ghosting, but there was also the interview feedback. And the interview feedback showed a very clear distinction between how people were talked about from a personality perspective, whether they were female or male. And surprise, men, there was often more power language, and versus women, more kind of pleasantness language, right? So this person was confident, they were powerful, they were strong, they were charismatic, or this person was nice and friendly and pleasant and could get along with. What do you think about that?
Oh, this one hits pretty hard, and we've seen this as well in both from Kieran's work about performance reviews as well. And then also within interviews, the types of questions that people get asked to even be able to show their competence. Oftentimes, I know in my own experiences, people express surprise when I talk in the language of finance and business. They say to me things like, I'm surprised that you have that expertise. And I ponder and say, why are you surprised by that? I am a curious nerd that started out thinking about economics. Why would that be surprising? I'm really not sure. Not to mention, I've run very large businesses. Yeah. And I don't believe that people have this because of overt bias. I think they just instinctively create a story for themselves about what your background might be, what package you come in, and what they think your capabilities are. But for women, this can be a very narrow corridor to walk because, of course, when people default assume you aren't powerful or confident or charismatic, or are less likely to use that language when they reflect about you, that can be a barrier to the types of opportunities that come your way. And so this is where we end up with things like pink collar jobs, where people are seen as capable for nurturing roles, but not capable for running lines of business. And so, yeah, I think this is part of the journey for women leaders, is breaking out of those molds.
Have you had any experiences of where you saw systems, maybe more in like the tangible, real life, of where things were made for men and not for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been part of sort of leadership experiences that maybe skewed male. I've been, or completely, separate but equal female experiences, as opposed to leadership experiences. I've definitely seen and had situations where, just simple things like, the company was giving logo wear, but it was always in male sizing, right?
Even as a young woman like a young, attractive woman, right? I would put on one of those t-shirts and I became like the ugliest,
very boxy,
stoutiest. I cannot wear this.
Hello, frumpy.
Yeah. I think it's gotten a little better, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, it was just awful.
I think our expectations have potentially lowered in the what we might want in terms of free clothing and logo clothing.
No,
but
I don't think so. I think it's gotten a little better.
Maybe
it's because we started ordering the clothing.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, that is exactly it, right? Like you shift into the leadership position, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I'll get something that has, is something that is in fashion, at least within the last 5 years, as opposed to 2 decades ago. Plus all the other things.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. The conference t-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had now they make different phone sizes, but for a while they were like making the phones like bigger, slightly bigger and slightly bigger. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like I can't fit my hand around.
We don't have pockets anyway. Where are we supposed to put this thing?
Yeah. I can't fit my whole hand around it. This is not designed for my little hand. Yeah. And then we have a massage chair, and like the first bunch of times that I used it, like I swear it was killing my ankles. And I'm like, this was not built for a, as my husband would call me, a petite flower.
Yes.
It was built for a 6 foot tall man with very strong.
Although I guess we do have a bit of an advantage with airline seats, which were also not built for many people, period. But
although it's like, I think for you, don't you have trouble like getting your feet?
That's right.
On the ground,
I can't reach the ground. Yes.
Yeah, and
thank you for telling everybody my legs are really short for me. I'm super grateful for that.
Sorry. Oh, maybe that was someone else. Yeah.
That's my petite flower thing. Yes.
So along the same lines as the like the power versus pleasant, kind of power versus emotion. There was another really interesting post that we saw recently by Jingjin Liu. And she was talking about The Diary of a CEO. And, great show. She was not disparaging the show at all whatsoever, but she was noticing that when it came to conversations around power, money, or the future, all of the guests were men. And when it came to things about culture and relationships, it was all women. And wow, that is a really obvious and terrible bias. So I thought we could talk a little bit about that, and like, are we seeing that? Is this something that we've encountered, and how do we deal with it?
Well, I'll give my point of view, but I think this is one that you're going to have to share your stories as well. So first off, I think this is a big part of why we want to have the Meg and Amy show and be talking about innovation, money, and power, because I think these are conversations that belong to women as much as men, and that need to have more voices and more perspectives, especially as we're in this moment of transformation and change in the world of work. I do not think we can be having a conversation of what is the right operating model for the business of the future and only ask those questions of 50% of the population. That makes zero sense to me. So understanding the lived experiences, understanding the perspectives, and bringing those conversations to the topics of innovation, money, and power, to me, is really non-negotiable. I think for my own experiences of being in situations where people struggle to understand what to ask. I mean, I've done at this point in my life numerous panels and webinars and podcasts, etc. And the number of times that I get asked questions about work-life balance or parenting or whatever, all topics I'm happy to talk about, but at the expense of ideas and innovation and business models, etc., is really significant. And I think it's a big part of why I wanted us to have this show, because I am thrilled to be part of any conversation that helps people imagine how to create their own future. But I do think being part of a conversation about creating a future is a very different conversation, and is one that I don't think we should shy away from.
Now I'm actually glad that we did the podcast. Up until now, I really wasn't.
I was just forcing you into it. You were faking it all this time. But no, seriously, Amy, like what?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking about this a little bit because we had interviewed Kieran, and this is our third reference to Kieran on the show. I guess we are kind of fangirls.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we had like that amazing episode with her, and there's this one piece where we're kind of talking about like what it was like to be a female founder, getting money, what, the balance with her. She had 3 small children, so we had like that little interlude. And afterwards I was like, was that should we have done that? But of course it was just a small piece amongst so much power and innovation and thinking, right? And so I gave myself a little bit of grace. And then I was thinking, okay, well, actually, when we met with Usman, and similar, big thoughts, big ideas, big future, we also, talked about his new fatherhood and how that was affecting him and that sort of thing. So I think what's really important is to have that balance, and to have that balance be across both, right? Because it can't just be about innovation, power, and money. It needs to also be about emotional costs and emotional wear and tear and all that kind of stuff. All of that needs to come together. And everyone needs to speak about both of those things.
Yeah, I think we actually should probably be pushing for more, emotionally deep topics to be asked of men.
Yeah.
I think it is similarly underselling their contribution to not be asking about the human side of their roles as well.
Yeah. So certainly in your line of work, Meg, you've been the only woman in the room. When did you start to notice that you were an other? When did this happen, and how did you navigate it?
So, it's so interesting because for someone that perceives themselves as quite observant, it's shocking even to me how long it took me to quite grasp that my otherness was being female. I think this is kind of a multifold thing for me because, being the first in my family to go to college, I felt like I was different already. Being very poor as a child, I felt like I was entering so many rooms that I hadn't been in. And having grown up from a single father, I also felt really comfortable around men. So I think it did not fully become clear to me that I was the only woman, because for some reason that had been true for other parts of my life. I think where it became part of my awareness kind of came in two places. One, when it became clear to me that people were looking at my success as tied to their own opportunity. So younger women, other women were commenting on my professional success as being a bright spot for them. That was really eye-opening for me and quite a shock. But then the other side of it is when I recognized that my opportunities were starting to bump up against barriers. So this was when I was really starting to think about breaking into executive ranks. And I recently read a book called The Likeable Badass, and I mentioned it in my last newsletter because I think it really unlocked an insight for me in that it was really at the moment of going into executive roles that I needed to shift from the manifestations of competence and warmth to a different mix. And I don't think that would have been true had I not been female. And so I think that it was at that moment that I started asking a lot of questions about why was I hitting a ceiling? And then starting to observe what is happening around me and to others, and started to recognize that, oh, wait, I'm the only woman in the room. Of course, people are seeing me different than I'm seeing myself and how they're seeing each other. So that awareness for me took a really long time because I had told myself up till then that there was no sort of gender bias and there was no barriers, et cetera. So I really had to rethink the entire way that I understood the reality that I was existing in.
Yeah, I had a similar path, Meg. I mean, obviously I didn't have the quite that much otherness before, but I think that youngness masked my my noticing of being one of the few or only female. And early advancement and getting to do more and even lead was really easy in the early days. And I do kind of wonder if men are more comfortable with younger women and they're really proud to help young women, rise and do well and coach them and that
and
sort of
also
thing.
benefit from what it is you're bringing, right? They see capability and they recognize oh, this person's going to do a lot of work for me, and that's a great thing. So I think that's when it's not really a threatening thing.
Right. Well, so that's exactly. So it wasn't until I gained, actual power and influence that I started to notice it. And I think at that point, then I started to be seen as a threat. I started to, be in that uncomfortable place where it wasn't just, oh, Amy, yes, good job, keep going. Now it was, oh, whoa, okay. It was very interesting. And so being able to balance that confidence with warmth, that, likability with badass was again, just like you said, something that I had to kind of navigate and figure out myself. Yeah.
Yeah, and to quote my conversation with Charlotte Otter on her Speech Bubbles podcast, she reflected back to me the extra emotional labor required for me to find a path forward was non-trivial. I don't think I'd fully appreciated that either, that there's just a significant number of additional hurdles that were started to become real to me as I progressed.
That makes complete sense. And yeah, I think, when I was reflecting with Charlotte on my journey, when I was in my 20s for sure, and maybe even, early 30s, I didn't really have any female role models, because they themselves were not figuring out this likable badass thing, right? They were just trying to be men or whatever. And meanwhile, I did have a lot of really good male role models, like men that, really were inclusive and collaborative and, like have a lot of the qualities that I admire in a leader even today. But for them, it wasn't like this big negotiation of, how do I show up? And they could just be themselves, right? Even as leaders, even as executive leaders. I remember this happened to us a number of times. So we would be on a call, like on a Zoom call or whatever, with like 20 people. And we were the only two women on the call. And one of us would speak and people would say, you would speak and they'd say, oh, thanks, Amy, for blah, blah, blah. And then I would speak and they'd say, oh, thanks, Meg. And be like, no, I'm Amy and she's like, how can you not like get two different people like that don't even look alike, mixed up? Like, yes, we are both women, but of the sea of people, can't we stand out on our own? Like, how are we just the same voice coming at you, right?
It's because we were so shrill, I'm sure.
It was just wild how many times that happened. So, what are some of the ways that you've overcome some of these instances?
So a couple things. I've always felt that it's very important, at least for me personally, I do not acknowledge nor believe that I am a victim at any status of my life. I own my agency and I believe strongly in my ability to figure something out. I do believe that oftentimes that has required me to have more agility and try more things than I think others may have had to do to navigate. One of the things that I suspect is that it is in that sort of lack of interest in making myself a victim or feeling sorry for myself that has caused me to say, all right, finding paths that don't work is part of the journey of finding paths that do work. And so I think in creating opportunity, being willing to recognize and read when something isn't working and using it as a learning experience to build my own toolkit for ways to make it not an issue. Is that an additional burden? Yes. Is that also an opportunity to build skills a lot of people never get the chance to build? You bet. And so that's the story that I tell myself, is that, all right, it will require me to have a bigger toolkit to navigate the world, and to be seen as both credible and qualified and likable, etc. But I think that the skills that I've developed to navigate that are useful in general. So I don't feel particularly bad about it, but I do feel that in that understanding, there is a reality that I've come to believe that the majority of career advice is built for men, that it doesn't work the same for women, and that there isn't enough data available for most people to understand that. And so often I think we get accidentally, given a trap by being told like, oh, just be more assertive, just be more confident, just be more this, be more that, or go to, a women's development thing so that you can learn empowerment or whatever, as opposed to recognizing that you're working against a different bar, a different expectation. And it's not because people are bad people or judgmental people or even against women. It's just because there is so few examples and so little data, we're back to a data gap, to make the experience more obvious and clear to others. And I think that is how I have learned to understand the problem and then also to find a path that works. And I think a lot of it is having better conversations with men.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So leadership frameworks and leadership advice, one thing that had popped up rather recently in one of the threads was, hey, likability isn't important for leaders. Just forget it. It's all about competence. It's all about confidence. Values, whatnot. But likability doesn't matter. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I think it matters for men too. I think it's just easier for them to be likable, I guess. But it's really something that women have to manage for their reputation. They have to manage their likability. I mean, obviously they can't just be likable. They also have to be confident and a badass and get things done and, create value and all that kind of stuff. But you really can't get very far if you're not seen as likable. And it's really hard to balance those two things and to recognize that and to give the space for that, I think is really important. The other thing, there's certainly a lot of talk about imposter syndrome, and it can often sound a bit patronizing when women are told like, oh, just get over it, like it's you got to get over it. Well, I do think that I do think that there is something to the fact that believing that everyone's full of shit does help. Yeah. And I think,
tell me more.
I think that's a core tenet that women need to take in. And I've seen this come up in various outlets where people say, okay, like, how would a mediocre white man approach this problem? Or how would a mediocre white man, think about themselves in this particular situation? So that's been kind of a fun one, but I learned this fairly early on. I think it was, again, like my early 30s. I was at a party with a whole bunch of mediocre white men who were, VPs and this and that. And I was like, what do they have that I don't have? Nothing. Like, they're just full of shit. I can do better than that. Like I'm just as capable. I'm just as likable. I'm just as, much of a badass. So that was a really important part for me, especially as a shy pleaser, I would say is my go-to. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to provoke. I'm not going to argue. Those are my default positions. But to have in the back of my mind that like no one really knows. Everyone's full of shit. It helps a lot. it helps a lot.
I think even Michelle Obama said something similar to that in her book Becoming, that she's sat with people that are in impressive roles but are not necessarily impressive. Of course, I'm sure she sat with people that were in impressive roles that were also very impressive, but there's no reason to believe that you yourself are not impressive, especially when you are working from your area of passion and expertise. And so I think that is a good way to anchor yourself, is to not believe other people's marketing and not to be so hard on yourself as well. Yeah.
The other, from a things getting better perspective. So I said, when I was younger, there was really a lack of female role models, and you were talking about like how there is a data gap in terms of examples and so on. And so I think what has changed and gives me a lot of hope for the future is that we're seeing more and more women being women as leaders, versus in the past maybe it was a few women trying to be men, right? So and I do believe in kind of this feminine leadership domain that it's incredible. It's super powerful. It's something that men also do and love. They love to work for women and men who have more of kind of this feminine style of leadership, and it gives me a lot of hope. What gives you hope, Meg?
Well, I think in this era of AI, I think humanity is going to be sought after and longed for even more. And I believe that creates opportunity for more voices, but I also think it creates a different path to what constitutes leadership. And so for me, again, I like to think that this is a hopeful moment where we have more access to information. There are more women leaders than there ever has been, and I fully believe that will continue, even in the pushback that might be happening in some sectors today. And I also believe that the need for leadership that has both the strength of character and the strength of conviction and the strength of competence, that this should not bias any gender more than the other. I think that this is going to change the nature of leadership, and I think it should open up that qualification set to more leaders and hopefully more women leaders. I think the other thing that I would really encourage anybody listening is that it is not that you need exclusively women leaders or exclusively male leaders. You need leadership. And so the goal is not to quota our way into being. The goal is to recognize that leadership is shifting. What is needed in leaders is shifting, and the expectation and the role of leadership is changing. And that we need to make sure that we're not looking at potential with the lens of the past, but that we're looking at potential with the opportunity of the future. And that is going to shift the narrative very much from whether this is a DEI kind of a conversation to this is a conversation about what is required to be a leader in this world of change. And that level of agility is a toolkit that is not available to everyone and one we need to be building, and that we should recognize that 50% of the population is another place that those skills show up.
All right, you ready for Leadership Corner?
Woohoo, yes.
Okay. I am a junior executive and just had a baby. I am headed back to work, and I am concerned that I will be overlooked for plum assignments and advancement. I am torn between hiding my personal life and being clear about boundaries. How should I approach?
Oh my goodness. Well, first off, congratulations on just having a baby. That is both joyous and hard. And I would say that really the best advice I got for coming back to work post maternity leave was from a man. Doug Merritt, what used to run our division at PeopleSoft. And he said to me, "You're going to be great. You're going to get a lot more organized. Don't worry about it. You've got it in you to make it happen." So that was such a powerful vote of confidence for me at the time. And I would tell you the same thing, that you will be great. It will be hard. You will need to come up with a different way to manage your own goals professionally with the changing needs for your life. And the other thing I would really encourage you is that I know everybody says it goes by really quickly. Actually, when they're little, it doesn't really go by really quickly, but I will say life is long and there's a lot of opportunities. So it is more than okay to decide that the right thing for you is to not put your hand up for plum assignments. And it's also good for if you feel like you can put your hand up. The key is that you do that based on what works for you and not feel pressure from outside, nor feel like you have to hide. I think you need to be having the conversation, and I'd encourage you to have it probably quarterly, but at least a couple times a year, to say, hey, this is how my life is shaping up. This is how I'm adjusting, and this is what I'm ready to take on or not take on. Because if you can have that conversation more transparently, you can then be open to shifting that conversation as things change for you in a way that gives you more agency and more power.
Yeah, and I think that conversation needs to start with yourself, right? So having that conversation with yourself of what do you really want to do and what do you really not want to do. So do start with those boundaries. Do be clear about those boundaries and your own expectations of what you want to take on. But then be really clear about that with your mentor, your boss, your sponsor. Have those conversations, and hopefully you have kind of a circle of trust of folks. I mean, I think that was certainly very helpful. Meg and I, both had babies around the same time. We both were advancing along the same path. We were supporting each other. We were giving each other power. We were, having that, source of energy and power with others is really important. I mean, obviously that doesn't always happen easily, but hopefully you have someone like that. I came back to work after having a baby, and I got 2 promotions in a year, and I was super gung-ho. I was super fortunate to have a very, very supportive husband, and my, such that I could do that. If I didn't have that, I'm not sure, what that would have looked like. So it kind of depends on what your support system is, right? Like that's the biggest thing. Look at your support system, look at what, that can take on, look at what you can take on, and go from there.
It also depends a little bit about the baby itself, right? Is the baby healthy? Is the baby thriving? Is the baby needy? Is the baby keeping you up all night? These are things that people have a point of view, but it's very different for each situation. And so to Amy's point, having that conversation with yourself and being clear, and then just letting go of judgment, any judgment you'd have on yourself, and certainly anybody else's idea of what you should be doing more or less of. I strongly recommend early days of parenting. Everybody wants to micromanage and tell you what to do, and it's
including
really...
us. If you want some advice,
even
though it's been 20 years. We're there for you.
Totally. Yeah. If you want to feel better about your job as a parent, let us know. We can tell you some bad stories.
All right. Well, I think it's time to sign off. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone to send your Leadership Corner questions in, because it's just so fun to get them and to talk about them here on the show. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the show and share with your friends.
Yeah, please also enjoy. Amy's been writing some recaps of the stories and the conversations we're having, which I've been finding really good. And then, of course, we've started a newsletter for which Meg drops a whole lot of information on you that you can choose to ignore or read, depending on your personal bias.
Run for the hills.
Yeah, totally. But you've been warned, and really grateful for everybody who has been subscribing and helping us on this journey. We're having a really good time. So let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.